Think the Game Boy Advance was just about Pokemon and Mario? Think again. This little purple brick had some of the best RPGs ever made, and a bunch of them still hit harder than modern titles in 2025. We're talking deep stories, clever combat, and hidden gems that most gamers completely slept on. So if you're ready to dust off the GBA or fire up an emulator, you'll want to stick around. Learning to code the old way usually feels like punishment. Endless tutorials, boring lectures, and the occasional existential crisis about whether the brain is actually working. Boot.dev decided to fix that. Instead of snoozing through slides, students jump straight into building real projects, like Python, SQL, Go, and even TypeScript. The idea is simple. Learn by actually doing the stuff developers do on the job. And it's not just coding in a vacuum. There's XP to earn, levels to grind, quests to complete, and even bosses to fight. Yes, it's basically an RPG for programming. To top it off, a bear wizard named Boots serves as an AI tutor, nudging learners back on track instead of just dumping answers. For practice junkies, there's the training grounds. Infinite coding challenges until those technical interviews stop looking terrifying. And here's the kicker. In 2024, the median salary for back-end developers in the US was over $100,000. And that's the kind of payoff this grind can actually lead to. Boot.dev makes all course content free to read and watch, and the interactive features unlock with membership. Plus, there's a 30-day no-questions-asked refund, so the only real risk is having to admit that coding can actually be fun. Head to boot.dev, use the code SAGE, and get 25% off the annual plan. If you ever owned a GBA and didn't play Pokemon Fire Red or Leaf Green, you missed out on a cornerstone of handheld gaming. These remakes took the magic of the original Red and Blue, polished every corner, added fresh content, and made them feel brand new. The most noticeable upgrade is how clean everything feels. The sprites, colors, and animations were completely redone to match the visual style of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, so it's way easier on the eyes than the old Game Boy versions. But it's not just a visual overhaul. The entire interface was modernized too. Menus respond faster, item management makes more sense, and training your team feels way less clunky. They also added running shoes, which sounds small, but it's a total game changer for exploration. And then there's the CV Islands, a whole new set of areas that expands the story beyond the Elite Four and even gives access to second-generation Pokemon. But one of the coolest things about Fire Red and Leaf Green is the inclusion of the Versus Seeker. This little item completely changes how you train and grind in the mid and late game. Instead of endlessly searching for wild Pokemon or relying on repetitive routes, the Versus Seeker lets you re-challenge certain trainers whenever you want, and their teams actually get stronger over time. It keeps the pacing tight and makes leveling feel way more enjoyable, especially when prepping for big fights like the Elite Four or optional post-game battles. It's a small mechanic, but it quietly fixes one of the most frustrating parts of the older games, the boring, grind-heavy progression. Even now, Fire Red and Leaf Green are some of the best ways to experience the Kanto region without feeling outdated. Back on the GBA, most RPGs stuck to turn-based menus. Then Battle Network 3 showed up and said, "Nah, let's mix real-time chaos with deck building and call it a day." And somehow, it works brilliantly. The story throws LAN and Megaman.X into another WWW plot, this time disguised as the flashy N1 Grand Prix. What starts as a simple tournament escalates into a chase for the Tetracodes and the release of Alpha, a corrupted prototype of the internet. The stakes hit harder than you'd expect from a GBA game, leading to one of the series' most emotional moments. You don't need to play the first two games, but knowing them makes the payoff even better. Combat is where BN3 cements its legend. Battles play out on a 3x3 grid for you and the enemy, and it's all real-time. You're dodging shots, lining up Buster Fire, and waiting for the custom gauge to unlock new chips. Then you drop a combo, chain into a program advance, and watch the enemy melt. It's quick, it's tactical, and it never gets old. But the real star is the new Navi customizer. Instead of just dumping power-ups into Mega Man, you slot puzzle piece programs onto a grid with strict rules. Mess it up, and Mega Man glitches, sometimes in hilarious ways, like randomly walking backward in battle. Nail it, and you get faster gauges, more HP, or wild effects that break fights wide open. Throw in style changes, virus breeding for unique chips, and a library system that tracks every card. And suddenly the metagame outside of combat is just as addictive. Version differences add spice. White gives you Mistman and Ground style, while blue swaps in Bowman, Shadow style, and the notorious folderback chip that resets your entire deck mid-fight. It's broken, it's beautiful, and it makes blue the power gamer's pick. Post-game content, brutal gauntlets, hidden bosses, and the absurdly strong Hubatch program that grants a buffet of perks at the cost of cutting your HP in half, unless you find a way to cheat the system. Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga is pure chaos in the best possible way. It's not just a fun RPG, it's a full-on comedy show with turn-based combat that keeps you fully engaged from start to finish. The combat system in Superstar Saga is where things get really clever. It's turn-based, but way more interactive than what you'd expect from a traditional RPG. You control both Mario and Luigi at the same time, each one mapped to a different button, so you're always actively participating. You have to time your button presses just right to deal extra damage or dodge incoming hits. And then there are the Bros attacks, special moves that combine both characters into flashy combos that deal big damage, but they also demand perfect timing and coordination. What's cool is that the game keeps mixing things up, adding new moves and enemies with patterns you actually need to learn and react to, almost like a mini action game hidden inside a turn-based system. The game throws you into the Bean Kingdom, a place that's completely absurd in the best way. Talking villains, exaggerated animations, and some of the most self-aware writing Nintendo has ever approved. You've got scenes that feel straight out of a cartoon, dialogue that lands every punchline, and characters so over the top they stick in your memory for years. And what's wild is that none of it feels forced. The comedy blends seamlessly with the story and mechanics, making it feel like every joke has a purpose. What really makes Superstar Saga stand out, though, is how well it holds up. The pixel art is still gorgeous, the soundtrack is catchy as hell, and the pacing is sharp. It knows exactly when to throw in a puzzle, when to give you a breather, and when to crank up the chaos. Even with all the newer Mario RPGs out there, this one still feels unique. Imagine smashing a Zelda-style RPG into a side-scrolling space shooter. Sounds insane, right? But that madness actually exists, and it's called Sigma Star Saga, one of the boldest experiments ever squeezed into the Game Boy Advance. It's an RPG, it's a shmup, and sometimes it feels like it's trying to be both at once, with mixed but fascinating results. The setup puts you in the boots of Ian Wrecker, a human pilot turned double agent in the Krill Empire, caught in a war over biomatter and a tangled bond with Syme, a rival ace. The story pushes multiple endings, and if you want to save everyone, you'll need to replay on New Game Plus. On the ground, Sigma Star Saga looks like a classic top-down RPG. You wander planets, chat with NPCs, and unlock paths with tools like scanners and boosters. But every few steps, the screen rips you into a random battle, and suddenly you're piloting a starship. Here's the twist. The game throws you into a random ship class every time, from nimble fighters to sluggish bombers, and each one handles differently. So you never quite know if you'll feel like an ace or a bus driver with wings. Combat is pure shmup chaos, but with RPG rules layered in. Enemies drop orbs that level up your attack and defense mid-run, and your arsenal comes from gun data. That's a modular system where you slot together a cannon, bullet, and impact to forge a weapon. 70-plus parts mean tens of thousands of possible builds, from spread shots to beams that split and ricochet. The catch? You can't swap mid-battle, so a bad setup can leave you sweating through waves of krill drones. The game's ambition also drags it down. Random encounters can feel endless, with some asking you to shoot down nearly 100 ships before you're allowed back to the planet's surface. The hitboxes are chunky, the backtracking heavy, and repetition sets in fast. Still, when you hit a scripted mission with a massive boss fight, the hybrid clicks and you see the brilliance Way Forward was aiming for. In 2025, the new DX edition smooths out the roughest edges, with fewer encounters, smarter XP, tighter hitboxes, and modern quality-of-life fixes. It doesn't just revive a cult oddity, it finally delivers the game Sigma Star Saga always wanted to be. Golden Sun isn't just one of the best GBA RPGs ever made. It's one of those games that made the handheld feel like a full-blown console. The story kicks off in the quiet village of Vale, where a group of young adepts, people born with the ability to control elemental powers called synergy, failed to protect a sacred relic after a mysterious storm. The battle system is turn-based, where each character can attack, defend, and use synergy, which is basically magic tied to elemental powers, but it's the Jin mechanics that elevate everything. You collect these elemental creatures throughout your journey, and they completely change how your party works. Assigning different Jins to your characters changes their stats, abilities, and even their class, giving you tons of room to experiment. In battle, you can use Jins to buff allies, debuff enemies, or unleash powerful summons that deal massive damage and look absolutely stunning for a GBA game. But using a Jinni also removes it from your character's setup temporarily. So there's a constant trade-off between building up for a summon and keeping your party strong in the moment. Another really cool aspect of Golden Sun is how synergy isn't just a battle mechanic, it's a core part of how you interact with the world. Throughout towns, caves, and even side quests, you're constantly finding new ways to use your abilities to uncover secrets or progress through areas that seemed blocked off at first. You can grow plants to reach rooftops, manipulate objects to access hidden rooms, and even read the minds of NPCs to reveal secret dialogue or useful clues. Visually, Golden Sun was a major achievement for the GBA. The environments are packed with detail, the spell effects are vibrant, and the summons look like something pulled straight from a home console. The soundtrack, composed by Motoi Sakuraba, adds even more depth to the experience. It's full of dramatic battle themes, emotional character motifs, and ambient tracks that make every location feel distinct and alive. And the writing? It's surprisingly mature. The characters have strong motivations, the world building is rich, and the story manages to balance lighthearted moments with more serious themes without ever feeling forced. Despite the hardware limitations, Golden Sun delivers a polished, complete RPG experience that still holds up today. Think Diablo on a Game Boy Advance. Sounds insane, right? But that's exactly what Shining Soul 2 pulled off back in 2003. On paper, it's just another hack-and-slash RPG, but once you get past the chunky sprites and tiny screen, you realize Sega squeezed an absurd amount of depth into that little purple brick. The setup is classic. Light and dark fall out of balance, a corrupted knight named Deathheart pops up, and behind it all lurks chaos, capital C, the kind that wants to erase everything. Story's not winning awards, but it sets the stage for what really matters: the grind, the loot, and the builds. You start by picking from 8 classes: Warrior, Archer, Sorceress, Dragonoot, Priestess, Brawler, Dark Wizard, and Ninja. Each one feels different, not just because of skills, but because weapons behave uniquely depending on who's holding them. A spear in the hands of a warrior is all thrusts, but give it to an archer and suddenly you're throwing javelins. Magic works the same way. You don't just unlock spells, you need to actually carry the right book. It's old school, but it forces you to plan instead of spamming fireballs. Leveling goes all the way to 200, with points dumped into attributes and skills. Add in the soul system, which are super moves charged by killing enemies, and you've got plenty of reasons to keep farming. Even your resistances level up as you take damage, though if you die to an element, that resistance drops. It's cruel, but it keeps you sharp. Outside of battle, the town becomes your workshop. Forging is a whole metagame, letting you combine materials like mithril or ori halcon to craft series weapons like Saint, Hatred, Force, you name it. And placement and gold spent affect the outcome, so it's not just slam 3 items together. There are arenas, monster cards to collect, side quests, and even an advanced mode that unlocks after the credits, cranking the difficulty for a full replay, which is way more content than most people expect from a GBA cartridge. And then there's co-op. Link up to 4 players and suddenly, dungeons aren't just grinds, they're chaos, with loot trading, ambush puzzles, and that perfect moment when your buddy dies mid-boss and everyone laughs before inevitably wiping. Okay, Shining Soul 2 isn't flawless. Story's thin and repetition is baked in, but as a handheld dungeon crawler, it's ridiculously ambitious. Released late in the Game Boy Advance's life, Castlevania Aria of Sorrow pushed the system to its limits and delivered an experience that still blows minds today. You play as Soma Cruz, a seemingly normal teenager who suddenly finds himself trapped inside Dracula's castle during a solar eclipse. The big twist is that Soma has the power of dominance, which lets him absorb the souls of defeated enemies and use their powers. Instead of just finding new gear or spells, you're constantly adapting by collecting over 100 unique souls, each with its own effect. Some turn you into a walking arsenal, others let you fly, summon demons, or manipulate the environment in clever ways. The possibilities for customizing your build are almost endless, and experimenting with different soul combinations becomes half the fun. The gameplay in Area of Sorrow is that perfect mix of tight platforming, responsive combat, and RPG depth. Movement feels smooth and precise, letting you dash, slide, double jump, and chain attacks with satisfying flow. The castle itself is massive and interconnected, encouraging backtracking and exploration as you gain new traversal abilities tied to the souls you collect. Combat is fast and flexible. You're constantly switching weapons, casting soul-based abilities, and reacting to enemy patterns in real time. There's a huge variety of weapons, from swords and spears to whips and even guns, each with different speeds, ranges, and animations. And because you're always gaining XP and leveling up, there's a real sense of progression that keeps you engaged. Visually, the game looks incredible for a handheld title. The sprite work is packed with detail, the animations are smooth, and the backgrounds manage to create a gothic atmosphere that feels way bigger than what the GBA should be capable of. And once you finish the story, there's even a secret mode that lets you play as another character, shifting the gameplay into more traditional Castlevania territory with a completely different moveset and no soul system. It's a brilliant bonus that gives the game even more replay value, and a perfect way to cap off one of the best GBA experiences ever made. What if I told you the Game Boy Advance hit a zone of the Ender's Game that ditched Kojima's flashy mech ballet and went full tactical RPG instead? That's The Fist of Mars, a spin-off most people skipped, but one that tried some wild ideas you'd never expect to see running on Nintendo's little purple brick. The setup is classic anime drama. You're Cage Midwell, a colony kid who stumbles into a rebellion on Mars after barely surviving an ambush. Alongside Miona, a girl with amnesia, you end up tangled with BIS, a resistance group caught between Earth's grip and the Martian Enders fighting for independence. It sounds straightforward, but the game plays out in chapters with branching scenes, optional events, and multiple endings that shift depending on how you handle certain story beats. And for a handheld tactics game in 2001, that was ambitious. Now the battles are where things get spicy. On the surface, it looks like Fire Emblem with giant robots. Grids, movement, weapon ranges, the usual. But then it throws the interactive action system at you. Every time you attack, the game zooms into a first-person view where you have to manually aim at a moving target, and when defending, you drag a cursor to dodge incoming fire. Land a hit on a cockpit and it's critical damage. Miss your dodge and you eat a rocket to the face. It's part tactics, part reflex test, and it makes every skirmish feel personal. But if you hate twitch mechanics, you can switch to standard mode and let stats handle accuracy and evasion. But honestly, the IAS is the game's secret sauce. Outside of battle, there's more depth than you'd expect. You manage upgrades, tweak mechs to favor power or precision, defense or evasion, and shop for equipment between episodes. There's even a handy in-game dictionary for terms and lore. Plus the rare ability to save mid-fight, a lifesaver when missions drag. Visually it's not mind-blowing, but the character art has style. And Yoji Shinkawa himself supervised the mech designs. The pacing can get bogged down with dialogue, sure, but the mix of tactical strategy, unique mechanics, and branching storylines make Fist of Mars one of the GBA's most overlooked RPG experiments. Sword of Mana is one of those GBA gems that got completely overlooked by a lot of people, but it's absolutely worth going back to. It's a full-on action RPG with real-time combat, customizable characters, and a surprisingly emotional story. The game lets you choose between two different protagonists, each with their own perspective on the same journey, which gives the whole experience more depth than you'd expect from a handheld title. You move around freely on the battlefield, dodge enemy attacks, and time your strikes with different weapons like swords, flails, and axes. Each weapon has its own reach and special effects, and unlocking new ones opens up new ways to interact with enemies. There's also a charge attack system that rewards good timing and positioning, letting you unleash stronger moves when the moment's right. On top of that, magic is tied to spirits you collect along the way, and each one brings different elemental spells that can combo nicely with your melee attacks. And every time you gain a level, you choose one of 4 classes to focus your stat growth: warrior, monk, mage, or sage. And each one boosts different attributes like strength, agility, or magic power. And since you're not locked into one path, it's totally possible to mix and match across levels, creating a well-rounded build or going all in on a single style. Visually, Sword of Mana is one of the most polished games on the GBA. The sprite work is detailed and expressive, with vibrant environments that really pop despite the hardware limitations. What makes Sword of Mana even more interesting is that it's actually a complete reimagining of the original Game Boy title, Final Fantasy Adventure, which was the very first entry in the Mana series. Instead of just updating the visuals or adding a few quality-of-life features, the developers rebuilt the entire experience from the ground up, adding new characters, fleshing out the story, and giving both protagonists their own emotional arcs. Some fans of the original felt the new version changed too much, but for newcomers, it offers a deeper, more cinematic experience without losing the charm of the original concept. What if every RPG fight wasn't just about slashing enemies, but about watching your weapon slowly snap in half mid-battle? That's the hook of Summon Night Swordcraft Story 2, one of the GBA's most underrated action RPGs, and a game that still feels fresh today. You play as either Edgar or Era, heirs to a lineage tasked with guarding a dangerous seal. When it's broken, your journey kicks off to hunt down the Demon Edge and stop the monster Gura. Sounds simple, but the real star here isn't just the plot, it's the crafting system and the guardian beast that tags along with you. Loki, Arno, Dinah, or Exiled aren't just battle helpers. They're little comedy machines that constantly color the adventure with banter. Combat plays out in 2D side-view action, You jump, block, dash, and swap between 3 equipped weapons in real time. Each strike chips away at weapon durability, and once it hits 0, that shiny blade shatters. You're forced to juggle different weapon types: swords, axes, lances, knuckles, and even drills, each with their quirks. And break an enemy's weapon instead of their health bar, and you'll pocket valuable materials to fuel the game's crafting loop. And that crafting system? It's the heart of the game. Using shapestones tied to each weapon type, you forge over 200 variations, upgrading, imbuing, and experimenting as you hunt for the perfect build. Fail to manage your resources, and you'll limp into the next fight with nothing but scraps. But when it clicks, the loop of Break Loot Forge is addictive in the best way. Outside battle, exploration hides a bit of Metroidvania DNA. Certain paths only open if you've got the right weapon. Knuckles push rocks, drills break walls, and spears poke items out of trees. There's even a fishing minigame that spits out rare ores if you're patient. It's not groundbreaking, but it ties back into that obsessive hunt for better gear. Sure, there's backtracking, and the magic system feels undercooked compared to the melee combat, but Swordcraft Story 2 makes up for it with personality, a surprisingly sharp sense of humor, and one of the most satisfying crafting loops the GBA ever saw.
Command execute! Target confirmed. Mode change. Fire!
If you've never played Fire Emblem on the GBA, you're seriously missing out on one of the best strategy RPGs ever made. The game takes place in the continent of Alibi, a land divided between rival kingdoms on the brink of war. You follow the journey of 3 main characters, Lyn, Eliwood, and Hector, each with their own story arcs that slowly come together as the conflict escalates. What's cool is how the game doesn't just throw you into a massive war without context. It starts small, showing Lyn's personal struggle to reclaim her rightful place in her tribe, and then gradually expands into a much bigger story involving ancient dragons, corrupted nobles, and a secretive cult trying to resurrect a forgotten evil. The combat is turn-based and plays out on grid-based maps, and each unit has a specific class, like knights, archers, mages, or swordmasters. And they all have strengths, weaknesses, and movement ranges that you need to master. One of the core mechanics is the weapon triangle. Swords beat axes, axes beat lances, and lances beat swords. It sounds simple, but using that system correctly can completely shift the tide of a battle. And if a unit dies, they're gone for the rest of the game, permanently. On top of that, terrain bonuses like forests or forts give extra defense, so learning how to use the map to your advantage is key to surviving the tougher chapters. And as your units fight side by side, they build bonds with each other. And that actually affects gameplay. The more 2 characters interact in battle, the better their support level gets, unlocking little dialogue scenes that reveal more of their personalities and backstories. But it's not just flavor text. Stronger support levels give stat boosts when those characters are near each other, which can be the difference between winning and losing in a close fight. Plus, some of these supports even hint at romantic endings or future alliances, depending on who you pair up. Forget the usual move, attack, and end turn routine. Yggdra Union Will Never Fight Alone takes the strategy RPG playbook, tears it apart, and rebuilds it into something brutal and brilliant. Born on the Game Boy Advance, it looks like a simple fantasy war tale at first glance, but under the hood, it hides one of the most inventive systems the genre has ever pulled off. The setup is classic on paper. Princess Yggdra flees her fallen kingdom with the sacred sword, Gran Centurio, teaming up with a ragtag rebel named Milanor to fight back against the Empire. Sounds familiar, right? But the second you touch the battlefield, you realize this isn't Fire Emblem with a new paint job. Every turn revolves around tactics cards. Draw one, and it sets your movement, power, and sometimes a skill that only triggers if your unit matches the card's weapon type. It feels less like pushing pawns around and more like playing chess with a deck of spells. And then comes the union system. Men form X-shaped unions, and women form plus-shaped unions, letting you chain multiple units into one clash. Positioning suddenly decides whether you crush a squad or watch your morale evaporate. Speaking of morale, forget HP bars. Units fight until their spirit breaks, and every clash chips away at that invisible lifeline. Terrain flips the odds. Forests, bridges, and forts can turn a losing skirmish into a last-second win, and even golems can smash bridges to change the map mid-fight. Add in a weapon triangle with swords, spears, axes, bows, and more, and suddenly every move feels like a gamble. Outside of combat, it's all about management under pressure. Items have durability, can't be unequipped until they break, and some double as morale restorers or permanent stat buffs. Reputation points open up trades and events, giving you more reasons to chase optional objectives. The PSP version refined the difficulty, added new characters and cards, while the modern remaster on Switch and PC brought in rewind, autosave, and speed-up features, making a brutal cult classic finally accessible without tearing your hair out.
Quite a skilled warrior.
In Tactics Ogre, the Knight of Lotus, you follow Alphonse, a young knight from the powerful Lotus Empire, sent on a mission to investigate unrest on the island of Ovis. What starts as a simple assignment turns into a moral nightmare, as Alphonse begins to question his orders, uncover hidden truths about the Empire's role on the island, and face the consequences of war and loyalty. The combat system in Knight of Lotus is classic tactical RPG at its best. Battles take place on grid-based maps, where terrain, height, and positioning all play a huge role. Attacking from the side or back deals more damage, and elevation can affect both your attack range and accuracy. But where the game really shines is in its customization. Every unit in your army can be molded to fit your strategy. You assign classes that not only change how they fight, but also how they grow over time. Some classes focus on brute strength, others on agility or magic, and many require you to meet specific stat requirements or use rare items to unlock. On top of that, there's an elemental system that gives each character an affinity, like fire, water, wind, or earth, that subtly influences how they interact with enemies and spells. And the alignment system adds even more nuance, with characters falling into lawful, neutral, or chaotic paths that can affect their class options and narrative events. And because the story branches based on your decisions, your choices in and out of combat shape the world in real ways, with different endings, unique scenes, and even exclusive characters show up depending on what path you take. Even though Knight of Lotus came out on the GBA, it's not some random spin-off. It's actually a prequel to Tactics Ogre Let Us Cling Together, one of the most iconic tactical RPGs ever made. The events of Knight of Lotus happen years before the main story, and they help flesh out the political landscape of the Ogre battle universe. You get to see how the Lotus Empire operates from the inside, and how its actions on the island of Ovis tie into the bigger conflicts that explode later in the series. What happens when a cult classic from the 90s gets more than just a coat of paint? You get Shining Force Resurrection of the Dark Dragon, a Game Boy Advance remake that doesn't just revive the original, it reimagines it with new layers, new characters, and enough tactical depth to keep you glued to that tiny screen in 2025. The premise is classic fantasy. You're Max, leading a ragtag army against Runefaust's attempt to resurrect the Dark Dragon. Sounds simple, but the remake adds new story beats, expanded dialogue, and even an entire subplot with Narsha, a Runefaust princess who gives the narrative more weight. The result? A campaign that feels familiar yet fresh, with around 35 battles spread across 8 chapters. Combat is where Shining Force flexes. This is grid-based turn-driven strategy, where each unit gets one move and one action. Agility decides the order, and the remake adds a turn list so you can finally plan without guessing. Terrain matters, forests and mountains cut movement but boost defense, while ranged weapons and area spells punish sloppy positioning. And don't worry, death isn't permanent here. If a unit falls, a priest can revive them between battles, though you'll pay for the mistake. Progression keeps things interesting. Characters level up, and once they hit 10, you can promote them to a stronger class, resetting their level but unlocking better gear. Shops let you buy, sell, or repair equipment, and sometimes offer deals which are rare items you missed in battle. Weapons and items often have special effects when used, but here's the catch. They can break, forcing you to think twice before spamming them. Outside of combat, the headquarters is where you manage your squad. Nova, the strategist, gives tips, and you pick your 12 fighters for the next mission. And you can stash gold in the bank so you don't lose it all if Max goes down. Priests save your game, lift curses, revive fallen allies, and handle promotions. And then there's Mawlock. His card system is exclusive to the remake, letting him copy skills, trigger special effects, or even summon clones if you've collected the right cards. It's quirky, powerful, and adds a layer of strategy you won't find in the original. Throw in hidden characters, secret items like the yogurt ring, optional battles, and you've got a remake that doesn't just honor the original, it outshines it. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance takes the deep, tactical gameplay of the original PlayStation classic and reshapes it into something more colorful, more accessible, but still packed with layers of strategy. It starts with a group of kids who get pulled into a dreamlike world, created from a magical book, where everything feels perfect. No bullying, no loss, no pain. But as they get deeper into this fantasy, the cracks start to show. It becomes a reflection of how people use escapism to run from real-life problems and how that comfort can eventually trap you. Here, combat happens on grid-based maps, where characters move in turns and each action, whether it's swinging a sword, casting a spell, or using a support skill, comes with its own hit chance, range, and potential consequences. Things like height advantage and direction matter a lot. Hitting someone from behind deals more damage and is harder to dodge, while archers and mages can use terrain to rain chaos from above. But what really sets this game apart is the law system. Every battle has a randomly assigned law, like banning certain weapon types, spells, or even healing, which forces you to constantly adapt your strategy. Break the law, and the in-game judge won't just give you a slap on the wrist. Your characters can lose privileges, miss out on rewards, or even get sent to jail. You build your party from a mix of races and jobs, and there's an insane amount of customization. With dozens of classes like black mages, paladins, ninjas, and time mages, every team feels unique. You're always tweaking your strategy, unlocking new skills, and finding combos that hit like a truck. Visually, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance is pure GBA magic. The pixel art is bright, clean, and packed with personality. Every animation feels snappy and alive, from the way a knight swings his sword to the sparkle of a spell being cast. And all of that is tied together by writing that's both simple and thoughtful, making the whole world feel consistent, emotionally grounded, and easy to get lost in. What if I told you that one of the most ambitious tactical RPGs on the Game Boy Advance wasn't about swords or magic, but about giant robots firing laser cannons the size of a building? That's Super Robot Wars Original Generation 2, and it takes everything the first game built and cranks it up until the handheld practically sweats. The story takes place 6 months after the First War, and peace doesn't last. Remnants of the Divine Crusaders, the Shadow Mirror, and the Alien Einst rise up, while the ATX and SRX teams return alongside newcomers like Lamia and Arado. And yeah, Lamia's awkward way of speaking in the English version became infamous enough to stick as part of her charm. You don't have to play the first game to enjoy this one, because the game recaps the key events, but veterans will definitely catch more references and returning story arcs. But let's talk gameplay, because that's where OG2 really shows off. The grid-based combat feels tighter, faster, and way more brutal. Units live and die by will, a morale system that makes your attacks hit harder and even unlocks advanced weapons mid-battle. Spirit commands give your pilots anime-style powers like extra turns, guaranteed hits, and emergency heals, but SP is always running low, so you've got to gamble on when to use them. Then there's the support system. In OG1, you just had one generic assist, but here, it's split into offensive and defensive support, each with limited uses per turn. Pair that with combination attacks, where two mechs team up for ridiculous cinematic finishers, and chain attacks that rip through a line of enemies, and suddenly positioning on the map becomes life or death. Oh, and map weapons are way more common now, so don't get cocky with clustered units. Outside of battle, you'll drown in customization. Pilot points let you raise stats or unlock new skills like attacker or support. Mechs can be upgraded in armor, HP, energy, and mobility, so parts, weapons, and even frame swaps turn your favorites into monsters. And if you chase battle masteries, which are the optional objectives, you not only unlock harder difficulty but also secret units, and even a hidden ending. It's longer, meaner, and way more rewarding than the first game. Lufia: The Ruins of Lore is one of those games that quietly slipped under the radar for most people, but it's a hidden gem that deserves way more love. It blends classic turn-based combat with a monster recruitment system that lets you add enemies to your team, kind of like a more strategic take on Pokemon. And even better, you can fuse monsters with your main characters to unlock powerful new forms and skills. Lufia also features a surprisingly deep class system that lets you mold your characters into exactly the kind of fighters you want. Instead of being stuck in fixed roles, you can switch between different job classes by collecting and equipping items called ancient texts. These texts unlock new abilities tied to specific classes like knights, monks, or mages, and over time your characters can master multiple roles, combining skills from different paths. And as you progress, you'll unlock special tools that let you interact with the environment in creative ways. Things like bombs to break walls, or items that reveal hidden paths and chests. It's a bit of a throwback to classic Zelda-style design, where exploration isn't just about walking from point A to B, but about paying attention to your surroundings and using the right tool at the right time. Even though Lufia: The Ruins of Lore plays a bit differently from the main games, it's actually part of the same timeline and serves as a spin-off that takes place between the first and second entries in the series. The story happens shortly after the events of the Fortress of Doom, and before Rise of the Sinistrals, acting like a narrative bridge. While it doesn't focus on the same main characters or the big Sinistral storyline, it still keeps the same universe, references familiar lore, and introduces a new cast with their own struggles and goals. If you've played the other games, you'll catch some callbacks and world-building details that tie it all together. But even if you haven't, the game stands on its own just fine and still gives that classic Lufia charm. What if an RPG threw out random battles, tossed experience points in the trash, and told you every swing of your weapon had an expiration date? That's Riviera: The Promised Land, one of the strangest and smartest handheld RPGs you probably missed. You play as Ian, a so-called grim angel ordered to unleash a doomsday weapon on Riviera. Classic setup, right? Except he loses his memory, stumbles into a quiet village, and ends up teaming with 4 very different heroines to protect the land he was supposed to destroy. That's where things get interesting, because the game doesn't just want you to save the world, it wants you to manage it. Exploration isn't free roaming. Every screen is basically a puzzle. You choose to look around, move forward, or spend trigger points earned in battle to dig deeper. Hidden chests, ambushes, secret events, all gated behind this economy, and even opening a chest might throw you into a quick-time event. Fail, and the trap fries you or the loot vanishes, so nothing here comes cheap. Then, there's combat. Forget stockpiling weapons. Your inventory is limited to 16 slots, and before each fight you can only bring 4 items. That staff you carried? With Fia it heals. With Sierra it blasts magic. Same item, but different role. Every use eats away durability, and when it breaks, it's gone forever. The twist? Breaking things isn't always bad, it's how you unlock overskills, which are flashy special moves powered by your overdrive gauge. Think of it as bittersweet progression. Sacrifice gear, gain power, and stats don't come from grinding levels, they come from mastering weapons. Train with a bow, learn its skill, and watch your numbers grow. It feels more like building characters through choices rather than watching an XP bar crawl. And because every battle is ranked, your performance feeds back into rewards and more trigger points, pushing you to play sharp instead of autopilot. Layer in the affection system, where your decisions and who lands the finishing blow shift relationships and endings. And suddenly, Riviera feels less like a throwaway handheld RPG and more like a tactical dating sim wrapped in resource management. First released on WonderSwan and later GBA and PSP, Riviera got a full remaster in 2024 on PC and Switch. So if you want an RPG where inventory stress is half the fun, this little cult classic deserves your time. Most people remember Kingdom Hearts for its flashy combat, giant keyblades, and that wild crossover between Final Fantasy and Disney, but Chains of Memories flipped everything upside down. Instead of real-time action, it introduced a card-based battle system that looked simple at first, but quickly demanded serious strategy. Each move you make in battle, whether it's a swing of your keyblade, casting a fire spell, or using an item, comes from the deck of cards you've built beforehand. Every card has a number, and if the enemy plays a higher one, your attack gets cancelled. So you're constantly managing not just what card to play, but when to play it. On top of that, there's a reload mechanic. Once you run out of cards, you have to pause and recharge your deck, which leaves you wide open if you don't time it right. You can also combine cards to pull off powerful slights, which are basically combo moves. But doing that means the first card used in the combo is removed from your deck for the rest of the fight. The story picked up right after Kingdom Hearts 1, with Sora entering a mysterious place called Castle Oblivion. The deeper he went, the more he lost his memories, and the more twisted the story became. It added layers to the lore that ended up being crucial for understanding future games in the series. And for a GBA title, it was surprisingly dark and emotional, especially as Sora struggled to hold on to who he was. And here's something a lot of players don't realize until they beat the main story. There's an entirely separate campaign where you play as Riku. It's shorter and more combat-focused, but it flips the whole card system on its head. Instead of building custom decks, Riku gets preset ones that change depending on the floor, which forces you to adapt to whatever the game throws at you. His story runs parallel to Sora's, but from a completely different perspective. Visually, the sprite work was top tier, and the cutscenes captured the same emotional weight of the main games, even on a tiny screen. For anyone who wants the full Kingdom Hearts experience, skipping this one is not an option. At first glance, Advance Wars looks like something you'd hand to a kid, with bright colors, chunky sprites, and little soldiers bouncing on screen. But the moment you press End Turn, you realize this isn't toy box fun. It's war distilled into pure tactics, and every single mistake you make comes back to haunt you. This Game Boy Advance classic may look cute, but it teaches strategy with a steel boot. The setup is simple enough. You're the advisor for the Orange Star Army, guiding a cast of young commanding officers like Andy, Sammy, and Max. At first, it feels like a Saturday morning cartoon about toy soldiers, but then the plot escalates into a continent-wide war, with rival nations and eventually the sinister Black Hole Army pulling the strings. Gameplay is where Advance Wars earns its legendary status. Every match boils down to 2 win conditions: capture the enemy's HQ, or wipe out all their forces, which is easy to say, but painful to pull off. Cities and bases aren't just pretty tiles, they're your economy. Capture them, and they'll generate funds every day while also repairing your units, but lose them, and watch your army starve. Infantry and mechs might feel weak, but they're the backbone of your empire since only they can seize property. The unit roster is deceptively deep. 18 different types, from humble tanks to long-range rockets, submarines, and bombers. Each one has fuel and ammo limits, forcing you to manage supplies or risk watching a jet crash into the sea. Terrain and weather matter too. Forests, mountains, rain, fog of war. Every little detail twists the battlefield in ways you can't exploit or get crushed by if you're sloppy. And then there are the CO powers. Fill that meter and unleash game-changing skills like Andy's global repair, Olaf's sudden blizzard, or Nell's infamous luck-based crits. These moments flip battles in an instant, rewarding aggression and timing. Outside the main campaign, you've got war room challenges, a shop run by Hachi where you unlock maps and COs, and even a full map editor to design your own nightmares. There are no RPG-style upgrades. Your growth comes from mastering strategy and hunting for S ranks. Advance Wars may look like child's play, but it's still one of the smartest, most addictive strategy games ever dropped on a handheld.